I'm going to start by introducing our two speakers, and then they're going to each take a few minutes to talk individually. And then we're going to certainly have some questions to ask them, and you can all put questions in the chat room as well. Again, we have you all muted, so please keep muted. And if you do have a question, put those in the chat room, and I will monitor that chat room, Greg and Ikey, so that you don't have to worry about watching that. Okay. All right, so first person we have with us is Greg Addo. Greg is the director, producer, and digital content creator of Addo Productions. He creates high quality, compelling video for a range of clients, specializing in documentary style and on-location shooting. Greg performs all aspects of video production, from pre-production to directing, to multi-camera setups and video editing. Fusing both technical skill and creative direction, Greg works intimately with his clients to collaboratively establish and maintain style, creative direction, and production management through the content creation process. Greg's worked professionally in all aspects of marketing through video. He began his career as Senator Cory Booker's personal videographer from 2009 to 2011, and he continues to work branded content industry. Prior to relocating to Buffalo, New York, he was the senior video producer of branded content at Time Magazine Incorporated Meredith Companies. Welcome, Greg. We have a very talented gentleman with us today. So we're also glad to have him now as a Buffalonian. Our next presenter is Ikey Ajavon. He's the founder of Believe Divergent, a clothing brand that uses thought-provoking messages to continue the tough conversations surrounding social, political issues. Ikey has worked in marketing for 6+ years at various companies, specializing in social media and video marketing. He has his bachelor's in business marketing, along with a master's degree in creative advertising. During the time completing his master's, he conducted extensive research into subtle racism in media, which informs much of how he tackles difficult topics. He hopes to use his content, clothing, and speaking opportunities to get everyone to think differently and always look at the bigger picture in life. Welcome, Ikey and Greg. Thanks for being with us today. So I'm going to turn this over first to Ikey, and he's going to just share a little bit more about his work and some things, and then we'll do the same with Greg, and then we'll switch over to questions.
Yeah, well, hello, everyone. Althea, thank you for the lovely introduction. That was great. So yeah, just a little bit more about myself, kind of how I went from, I guess, a younger adult to where I am now. So I'm originally from, and I guess most people actually know where this place is, Canandaigua, New York. Most people have no idea where that is when I tell them. So from Canandaigua, grew up there. It's a very predominantly white town. So my sisters and a couple other people are like some of the only Black folks in the area. So you can say Black experience is somewhat unique to some of those that you might see portrayed in the media or anything like that. So growing up in Canandaigua, things were great. Everything was just fine. Everything was awesome. And then this is the Buffalo connection. I went to university at Buffalo, where I had the great opportunity of going to a big university, one of the biggest ones in the state, which was really great to help introduce me to some of the different aspects of life. Getting out of the small town, I think, was really important for my growth, and has continued to help me get to where I'm going now. Being exposed to a ton of different cultures. UB is actually super diverse. And then after that, I had the whole internship magical situation where I had an internship in college, which turned into a full-time job. Those of you in Buffalo might remember Back USA. So I was I think I was employee number 11 or 12. So I was there really early on doing the marketing. That's where I actually met Jenna's husband, Ian, and he was there doing sales and things like that. So my marketing career really took off there. And again, Back USA was incredibly diverse, which again helped me shape where I am today. Very understanding that the world is a lot bigger than the small town you're from, which I think is really important. There, I got into the groove of doing a lot of social media marketing, doing a lot of brand marketing, a lot of content marketing, taking over the advertising at the time, and just kind of growing and being exposed to a ton of different people from a lot of different areas of life at different ages, different everything. And it was really helpful to help me kind of break out of my shell, I guess you could say, from, small kid from a small town. After a couple years there, I was there for almost 4 years, which is weird to say out loud, because that's a long period of time. I took off and went to England to get my master's in advertising. And I guess a similar vein with other things, being exposed to a bunch of different cultures, going around the world, traveling and seeing all these different countries, meeting people from all these different places was incredibly eye-opening. And again, just helped me see things a lot differently. And as Althea mentioned, my dissertation was on subtle racism. And I think this is the point where things really started to shift for me. I started to really look at things a lot differently. Um, and that dissertation was really long and took me a long time that summer or last summer to write, but it was amazing to look at things through a scientific scope, through an academic scope. And I think that really helps me personally this year and helps me present things like this in a way that helps people understand that it is a lot more nuanced than just like there's a lot of gray area and a lot less just black and white. That can be taken in a lot of different ways, that sentence, which is interesting for what we're talking about today. And then fast forward to this year, obviously the pandemic has been horrible and things have been crazy. And I think this summer after like George Floyd was murdered, it finally, all the years of like being exposed to diversity and learning and getting all these things out, kind of like the bubble kind of burst. And I was like, I need to like take an active role in doing something to help anyone and everybody. So that is when I started I already had a YouTube channel connected to like the video marketing I was doing before, but that's when I started making videos pertaining to my dissertation, presenting the research, going to different topics, intersectionality and tokenism and all sorts of things like that. And then from there, I launched my clothing brand. As Theo mentioned, it's called Believe Divergent. Jenna is also sporting one of the things from my line. And as mentioned, the whole idea is to get people to think differently and to show that like, if we all can like take a step back and look at the bigger picture, as I thankfully have been shown all throughout the years in different areas and things that I've been exposed to, we can all kind of have a better idea of what's going on and help and talk through these things, because it is going to be awkward until it's not awkward. So that's one of the things I hope that my clothing brand and then the videos and then conversations like this can do is get everyone to kind of think differently and get out there and make the world a better place,
Thanks, Ikey. That's great. And I just ordered a shirt as well. So thank you so much. That's Believe Divergent. So great clothing line. Great. We're going to turn it over to you. Same type of thing. And then we'll have some questions.
Hi, everyone. My name is Greg Addo. I am originally from Southern New Jersey. I grew up there and went to college at Montclair State, where I got a degree in broadcasting and a separate degree in photography. As described in my bio, I kind of started my career working in politics. Was very entrenched and familiar with branding and marketing and political messaging, and transferred that career to another media organization in Manhattan, where I moved to Brooklyn and spent a few years working on the broadcast side of things, and then left there after a few years to start my own freelance video production company that was specializing in branded content. So a lot of short feature social videos for Lexus, Bank of America, ARP, Hewlett Packard, Coca-Cola, all those brands, and very in tune with just marketing and messaging, and very often making lots of real-time decisions in terms of like what's important. And I think with the advent of social media, I think people have really needed to fine-tune and hone their marketing objectives. So I've been a part of the culture of where when Vine was a thing, taking 7-second videos and really needing to be intentional with every second of content being created there. So after a few years of doing that, my wife, who is also a very talented photographer, she was the senior digital photo editor at Glamour magazine, and I took a staff position at Time Inc. During the period where Meredith had acquired Time, and a bunch of those publications were bought out and sold, and that's a whole nother separate story if you're into marketing and that whole thing. It's a fascinating story. But I oversaw the food and beverage, retail, CPG, consumer packaged goods, and celebrity and entertainment verticals for all the publications, including, you know, Time, Food and Wine, Entertainment Weekly, People, Travel Leisure, those types of brands. So we had a daughter, my wife and we decided to do the smart thing and move back to Buffalo, New York, to be closer to family. And over the last 2 years, my wife and I have founded and run Addo Productions. We're a full service content creation company. We do everything from photography and video to and take ideas from, you know, either their infancy stage and fully bake them for clients, or you know, take an idea and execute it and put our artistic spin on it. I kind of come at this from a different, I guess, perspective than Ikey. So I'm kind of, you know, happy that we both have a pretty, I think, balanced view of and understanding of marketing to talk about. And yeah, I obviously along the way, that's a lot of companies to work for and with. And I've been in the room for a lot of conversations, a lot of eyebrow raising conversations. And I'm glad that, you know, Leadership Buffalo is, you know, providing us the forum to discuss some of those experiences and also really just to provide some clarity. I think you know, obviously being a person of color, you know, a Black male, I am definitely one of the few Black producers, not only just, you know, in Brooklyn from where I came from, but, you know, especially in Buffalo. I think, you know, I bring a unique perspective that some companies are obviously interested in working with, but are also clearly not accustomed to working with as well. And that comes out in different ways. So I'm happy to talk about how some companies show that and, you know, what I would like to see going forward for our industry.
Thanks, Greg. I appreciate that. Thank you. I think it's important for the audience to hear your backgrounds because you both have very excellent backgrounds and you've had a lot of experience in different areas. And so you have probably have some good knowledge on what to weigh in on some of the questions that we have. So I want to ask you both this question. Greg, we'll start with you since we have you unmuted. What, like, there's a lot of questions here. I'm just looking to see what. So how would you look at diversity different than tokenism? Can you explain the difference?
Yeah, I think diversity is not just a room of people of color or a wide range of people of color. I think diversity is an earnest mix of cultures and backgrounds and ideas that all help to form a unified opinion or environment. And you know, I think tokenism is the desire to achieve that solely for quantitative or box checking purposes. I think tokenism is a very inauthentic way of creating culture. I'm sorry, tokenism is an inauthentic way of creating culture or replicating culture, or, you know, doing something to hit a quota, where diversity truly acknowledges the different opinions and backgrounds that people can have. So, you know, there can theoretically, there could be a room full of white people that is a diverse room, you know, and theoretically there could be a room full of entirely Black people that is not a diverse room, you know, and every combination between that. But I think when companies strive for true diversity, and I think when brands and marketing and advertising executions happen, I think in a authentically diverse manner, I think a lot of the issues that we have seen in campaigns. And I think a lot of the, unintentional racism that happens, sorry, the room that I'm in, the lights just turned off automatically. I think that it's easy to point out the flaws in that marketing when that happens. And it's so obvious to people that do come from a diverse background, because a lot of the things that offend people so greatly, unfortunately happen when tokenism is the goal, or the outcome, when diversity should be the goal.
Thanks for sharing that. I think it's interesting to watching a lot of the companies going from what they were calling diversity to now changing it to diversity and inclusion, because they were practicing tokenism versus diversity. So a lot of companies have added diversity and inclusion, making sure they're not just making the hire, but making sure that that person feels that they're wanted there. They're not a box check. Have you ever been a token hire?
Token hire, I would say, well, it's funny, I didn't think about it like that. When I worked for Cory Booker, I was his personal videographer. I knew that my job was going to be in a lot of sticky situations, politics, especially at that time in an urban environment. My day-to-day was everything from ribbon cuttings to drug busts to police reform initiatives, and I don't know, housing and urban development things. So I think that I was told flat out, one of the reasons why I had my job was because I was a Black person of color. And that's not a slight against, Cory Booker, or the people, in his team that had hired me. Sorry, I just got something that kind of threw me off there. Yeah, so I mean, that was a time where I think I was a diverse hire with intention. I think that, the messaging around there being so few African-American cameramen, especially 10 years ago, even more so, that, the desire for the mayor to paint a colored picture of his team and not have, some young white person following him around in these environments for people to pick at. I think it was a very intentional decision of his to hire a person of color. So, I mean, that's one of the few instances. I've jumped around to many different careers, and obviously I work for myself now, so it's hard for me to say directly, but I think that's, sorry, I'm not sure if that fully answers your question, but I think, without dodging the question directly, I think that that's an instance of hiring someone knowing the circumstances that they will be in, and knowing, Ike does a really good video on code switching. If you haven't checked out his channel yet, you should, because he does a bunch of different videos that I've watched over the, since meeting him a week ago. And, that's one of the scenarios where knowing what a person of color will deal with and will need to get through as part of your job. I think that there are times when you can specifically hire a person of color for that purpose without intent, or without being called a token hire.
Thank you. No, that's good. That explains things. So thank you. Ikey, same question. How would you explain diversity different than tokenism? And also, have you ever been a token hire?
Yeah, I think Greg was spot on. I probably just kind of piggyback off what he was saying. I think the biggest difference is going to be like intent, right? Like, and you see this a lot, or you would see this a lot, and it still happens now, where people are like, oh, we need to have one Black person, or we need to have one person of this or one person of that. And it's the difference between like just having to have that person and like actually wanting to have them. And Althea, you said this, and Greg said this, like, and creating an environment where they actually are heard and they're actually part of the team, and where their opinions aren't just brushed aside, because historically that's just kind of how it works. back in the day, I guess you could say, maybe not even that long ago, people would hire people of color just to hire people of color. And then when they would speak up, they would get talked over. When they would have an idea, they'd get brushed aside. And I think having the biggest difference is like if you're working on creating a diverse team, you have to, and you also mentioned this, like the inclusion part is probably as important, if not more important, because if you can hire all the people of color you want, if they're not if they don't have an actual seat at the table, if it's just symbolic, it's not going to get you anywhere, you know. And there's so many benefits of having, you know, different ideas and different backgrounds and different this and different that, and if you're not in the position to cultivate it, or if you're not actually attempting to cultivate it, then yeah, you're just kind of hiring for looks or for this or for that, which is obviously not the right intention. And that's gonna, one, is going to make that person feel uncomfortable, and two, you're most likely going to make a huge mistake, like we've seen over and over and over again. So like, for example, my dissertation was based off of the big mistake that Gucci made. I don't know if anyone's familiar with that. They made a sweater that looks like blackface. And for it to get through all of those people, all the people that work there, and for it to be put into production and to be put on the runway and to be put into magazines and be sold online, and nobody to be like, throw up a hand and be like, hey, maybe this looks a little bit like blackface, just shows that even if there were people of color working there, they weren't being heard. I don't think there was a lot of people of color working there at the time, but that's kind of the idea there. And that was kind of the idea that's like spawned my whole thing, was if this huge thing got past us, how much little stuff is like getting past. So it's really important, I think, that you have to have intention, and you have to be really looking forward to and want that inclusion part of it too, because being talked over is something I think a lot of people of color, marginalized groups, get when they join jobs, especially if they're like the first person of that group, and their perspective might be really different. So it's really important for hiring managers and people in the company to boost up their voice, and that's going to be like the true diversity and inclusion. And for your second question, have I ever been a token hire? I hope not, but I mean, I don't know. I've been in, I think, every single one of my jobs I've had, even like like working at like Rite Aid in high school or whatever. That's probably not what we're talking about, but college jobs at Back USA and in college and in England, my master's, and even now, I've been the first one or like the second like Black person there. So there's, and I didn't think about this when I was younger. I think it may be a bit more naive or just not knowing about this stuff. But as I've grown older and all the experience and all this stuff, I'm like, I wonder if I was like a token hire, if I was like the person that they're trying to get the diversity ball rolling. And I mean, thankfully, I've had a, to put it back to the metaphor, I've had a decent seat at each table I've sat at all the jobs I've had. So I don't think that's the case. And I think, and maybe we'll get to this later, but it's important to see if the intention's there, or if they're just filling a quota. But if the intention's there and they're just early in the process, it's hard. You have to make sure not to, like, I guess, accuse people of like hiring as a token, because like, for example, the job I have now, there's 8 people. And my day job, not Believe Divergent, there's only me for that. My day job, there's only 8 of us. So I'm the first Black person they've hired. I don't think that it's necessarily a token situation. They're just like super early on in their diversity situation. It's like 4 women and 4 girls, or 4 men and 4 women. I'm one Black person. We have 1 Asian person, for example. So as far as diversity is concerned, I don't think either of us are tokens per se, but there's a decent, and my boss and I were close. Like, I know that they're not just hiring for numbers, but I think it's important to know that there is sometimes going to be someone that looks like a token, but maybe the company's just super early on in the process.
And just to piggyback off that, I think what's important to note is, I mean, the reason why we're dealing with this issue still to this day is because there aren't enough companies with people of color, right? Or you know, diverse, however you define your own definition of diversity. So there is going to be a pain point process of, you know, that awkward phase where, you know, your HR reps are looking at each other and being like, oh, we're only hiring Black people, or we're only hiring women, or we're only hiring, you know, wherever. And, you know, to Ike's point, there is a huge and definable difference between, you know, hiring a person solely because they're Black, or hiring a person because they are Black, because you want to hear what they have to say. And I think that any company that can truly execute, through the hiring process, and whether they decide to be, transparent about that or not, I think it's completely reasonable for a company to say, yes, you are entirely qualified for this role. You're entirely, whatever. We had 20 other applicants that are also entirely qualified for this role. The reason why we're hiring you is because you are bringing a unique view to our company that we didn't previously have, and that is valuable to us. And if throughout that person's employment during their, tenure at that job, that is upheld and that view is valued, then I will make the case, and anyone logical can make the case, that is not a token hire. That is a true desire to expand the value and reach of your company. And I think that is the desire that I would have for, for companies to make. It's awkward. I can understand that, but there will be a period of pain. Not, I say pain point, but difficulty, awkwardness, whatever word you want to use there. When expanding your workforce to make yourself more diverse.
No, I think that makes a lot of sense. And I think, I do believe that a lot of companies are starting to go in that direction versus hiring for tokenism. So let's talk a little bit, let's stick with you, Greg, and then we'll go back to Ikey on the same question. Let's talk about advertising. So why is it okay for a company to make an ad inclusive if the company itself doesn't reflect diversity within the company? Or maybe it's
yeah, I mean, I think the same thing applies to my previous answer in terms of like, what is your intention, right? Like, is your intention to market to Black people because you heard they might buy your sweater, or is your intention to market to Black people because you've looked at your sales traditionally and felt like you've maybe marginalized a certain, group of people that could also better themselves by utilizing your product, right? When I think of brands that are like race associated, I think of like an Eddie Bauer or 10 years ago, like a Patagonia, right? Like that was white people stuff. There's really no other way to say that. That was a white person's brand. That was, and why is that? And how is that? These are outdoor leisure activities, and traditionally, Black people were not welcomed in the outdoors. I, as a person of color, grew up being the only Black Boy Scout, in the area, being the only Black kid that, did outdoor things, and that's was reflected in what I saw, and that was reflected in what I was told, and the sports that I played and the activities that I pursued. And it wasn't until much later in life that I started to see myself reflected in the brands that I was choosing, because they were intentionally for the sport or the activity that I was choosing. And that was very frustrating to me as a person of color, knowing that I wanted a good jacket or boots or something like that, and having to internally wrestle with the idea of wearing a brand that I could potentially be made fun of because that wasn't something that Black people wore.
interesting.
And that,
You don't even.
I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
No, that's fine. So I'm not sure if I'm beating around the bush a little bit or answering your question to its fullest extent, but I think to answer your question, it's I think as brands grow, and as we're at a moment in history where never before has advertising been so prevalent, right? Advertising dollars is probably, outside of like pharma and all these other like, big oil and, everything like that, like advertising is probably one of the biggest industries on the planet, right? All of these brands have the ability to reach this globalized world in a way, through social media and digital platforms that has never been available before. These aren't paper boys, delivering a newspaper or a magazine on their routes. It's media that can be consumed instantly anywhere. And if you are not marketing to the entirety of the world or the entirety of, you know, your country or wherever, you are foolish. And you know, the companies that are seen as traditionally white or traditionally black or anything, you know, traditionally Asian, whatever, if you're not creating a more uniform culture in what you're showing, then you're not representing what this world is.
Yeah.
And I think more people are seeing so much of the world that it stands out when you see an ad with only blonde hair, blue-eyed people in it. It stands out because that's not what this world actually looks like. So it feels more weird to have that blonde hair, blue-eyed advertisement. And I don't think it's a farce or, you know, forced to create a marketing campaign that better reflects the community and the world that we live in. And marketing campaigns are executed much more quickly than hirings happen, you know, than creative teams are formed, you know, then, you know, creative directors are hired. So, you know, if a team is building that marketing strategy to be, you know, more multicultural, more diverse, I say good for you. I just hope that your HR team is also, you know, putting out, you know, job openings for a more diverse
Yeah.
company. And if you're not, that then it's inauthentic, and it then you are pandering, then you are you know, just seeking out that token ad campaign.
Yeah. So Ikey, same question. You know, what's your thoughts on that? You know, having if a company does make an ad inclusive, but they're not in themselves, they're not walking the walk, in other words.
Yeah, I think there's a couple different ways to look at it. I definitely agree with everything Greg has said. I ditto. You know, like all the stuff with, you know, brands for these type of people, brands for that type of people. Growing up, that's definitely that's something I think everyone can imagine and think about. But I think that it's more okay for brands to have diverse advertising, like Greg said, because um, you can do an ad tomorrow with on high, if you have a lot, if you're a big company, we'll say you have a lot of money, you could do a diverse ad tomorrow, but it's going to take a while for you to hire a bunch of diverse people. So yeah, intention is important, but also I think you'll see this more, especially with the way that companies are presenting themselves. There's more of a responsibility for them to show what things are like and what they could and should be. So to explain that further, when someone goes into town, into any kind of town in America, and takes a picture, that's like a representation of real life in that area. But the beauty of advertising and marketing and stuff like that is you can completely fabricate whatever you want. So there's really no reason that big companies with big budgets can't create these diverse advertisements. And there's research to show that people react just as fairly to diverse, inclusive advertising as they do to ones that are like all white, for example, if we're going to use that as a contrast. So for me, when a company is choosing, and hopefully they are doing this with the right intentions, not just try to make money, even though they, in theory, will make more money, right? So it's kind of like, it's like morally good, and you also make more money. So why wouldn't you like get on board unless you're just a terrible person? But basically, the idea is if you have the ability to completely choose the cast of your commercial, for example, and you just are at this point, your vision is just to choose white people, then like why? Like you have the power, and media has such incredible influence. As we've seen, implicit bias is an incredible strong thing that we all have, right? So in the media, it's going to be advertising and TV shows and all that stuff. There's going to be something that's going to help people see things in a different light. So the fact that they have this, not, it's not, it's this response. I like to think of it as a responsibility. Like like you said, it's not like a paper boy like throwing papers at people's houses every day. Like these things are being seen across the world and really do influence people, whether they like it or not. So if you can make those changes to help show people that the world is more inclusive, like if someone in, I don't know, rural Idaho starts to only see very diverse ads, it's going to change how they think about things. And I think once we have people at these organizations that see the power that they do have, even if it is small bits over a long period of time. For me, it's really important that they actually do this because it's completely made up. And you'll hear, like back in the day, I did a lot of research on fashion stuff. It's like, oh, my vision is this, and it needs to be these types of people. Well, maybe we should start forcing these people or hiring people that have vision that include other types of people, because it's really not acceptable at this point. The world is super diverse, so if they, like these people that are we're constantly taking this stuff in, so it's going to be up to them to continue to show us that the world is diverse and make it okay for the people that don't live in big cities like New York or Buffalo is getting pretty diverse and things like that. Like there's going to be a lot of people in a lot of places that are going to only see things on the news or only hear things in the media. So to me, it's like a responsibility that they are diverse, and hopefully they're taking that thing, those ideas, and also taking it to who they're hiring as well. And it's just going to be, it's only wins. Like if your company's more diverse, that's like historically gonna make you more money, which is like what companies want. If you're advertising more diverse, you're gonna reach more people, which is gonna sell more things, which is gonna be really helpful for what you want. So it's almost, to me, it's a no-brainer, but obviously that's not the case, or else we wouldn't be having this conversation.
Yeah.
So you talk a little bit about, just kind of say, you mentioned the news. This is more broadcast journalism than it is actual marketing, but this is a question that came from the audience. So what are your thoughts on how incidents are portrayed in the media regarding race? And this is, again, more in the news. For example, instead of just stating facts like police involved in fatal shooting, they would print something or say something like white officer kills black man. You know, they say, when they say those things, they immediately they start to put a prejudice or stereotyping thoughts behind it. Again, I think there's also a lack of well, it's getting better, but especially like locally, I'm looking persons of color in the media, in jobs in the media. There's not as many. So, what's your thoughts on that? And then we'll ask the same question to Greg.
Yeah, so I think the thing is, and the more and more you look into these topics, the further back you'll realize that everything goes, right? So the biases that are created, that everybody has, that when you said a statement like the white officer kills a black man, like there's all these things that are connected to what we've been seeing our entire life, right? So there's all these stereotypes that are wrapped around how black people are portrayed in the media, and that's um, you know those are dug in even more with movies and TV shows and stereotypes, and just who you see in the media, the way they portray people in the media. And this goes back basically probably way before even TV started, right? So the problem is it's not going to be, it's not like it'll never be an easy problem to fix, because it's so ingrained into our culture, the way that we portray certain people, certain races, certain genders in the media. You can even see this on like very simple things, like the way that one thing that comes up a bunch is like, are people already talking about how we're going to be critiquing Kamala Harris's outfits for things like that, right? Because there's certain biases that are always going to be there for women, not always, hopefully, but there's going to be these things where we're going to have people on individual levels change the way that they talk, and the way, because these words are so powerful, and they're backed up by all the years and years and years of bias that were shown through TV shows and movies and things like that. And thankfully, there's been a lot of stuff recently, TV shows that are much more inclusive and this and that. But until we can, change some of these deep-rooted biases about how people already think, or get people to not assume things, which again, these are huge terms which people have to do on an individual level, because it'll be almost impossible to get everyone to be like, okay, let's all stop thinking about stereotypes. Like, that's not going to work, obviously. That'd be great if it did, but it's not. So it's almost like a vicious circle of things perpetuating bad stereotypes, and then the news media, for this question specifically, saying things in a way that perpetuate that same stereotypes, almost as if it's you have an idea and then the news shows you something that reinforces it, even though it's not necessarily based on anything. So you're just going to continue to think about it that way, which is obviously very hurtful. And it kind of goes to the responsibility I was saying, like with advertisers. I think there's definitely a responsibility with the news media of how they portray things and how they talk about certain suspects. the images that they show. One thing I saw stuff about this summer was, how often do you see like a white person being murdered on TV? I don't think I've ever seen that, but we all saw the video of George Floyd being like murdered, right? And it's things like that that are gonna have to start to change, because everyone's getting desensitized to things for certain races, certain genders, certain whatever. But there needs to be there just has to be a shift somewhere where we can start to, I don't want to say even the playing field, because that sounds kind of weird, but there needs to be more of a understanding of that things have these biases. We need to kind of break away from that and portray things in a different way.
Yeah, boy, we got a lot of work to do here. Greg, do you want to weigh in on that same question?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's very similar to my earlier comment about, a lack of diversity and a lack of culture, within an organization. And I think, ideas get vetted quickly when there is a diverse room of people that can, make a decision. And, the news media is no exception to that. I think a lot of I know that a lot of the higher ups, within those organizations create, checks and balances for things that their lower downs know are okay or aren't okay. And, I think if, habitually referring to Black people as thugs on television, those words get by. And, that has a very negative connotation. There's no white equivalent to the word thug. There's no, like, when you think of thug, you think immediately what that is. Everyone has that picture in their mind of what that person looks like. And the news media has their own issues. I'm much more qualified to speak in terms of marketing, but I think it's the same problem, just executed in a different medium, in a different format. So yeah, and I think one thing that's important, because I know there are some people that work here, or are potentially in the position to hire or work within companies. A point that I'd like to make, and hopefully people take away with, is that, an actionable item, if we can, walk away from this conversation with anything, is, really just to think about the opportunities that, you've had in your life, for no reason other than, who or who or I'm sure that if you look back at your career, especially people that are older or have had multiple jobs, you can think about a job that you've had solely because your uncle was on the board, or your cousin had worked there or something like that. And there's no reason why you should have been hired other than the fact that you knew somebody. And I know that sounds really obvious, right? Well, that sounds obvious, but part of the habitual problem, with a lack of diversity and a lack of true culture in the workplace, is that, Black people, just by a sheer percentage, do not have that person, that uncle that is the executive at some company that, can hire you for an internship, and that nepotism, that cultural nepotism persists in our culture because, people of color are not awarded the same opportunities that people of color struggle with, and I would say, if you are an organization that says, well, I can't find the right person, or we'd love to hire a person of color, but we just can't find anyone qualified, I would ask you to look deep down and say, think about the last 10 hires you made. Was all 100% of those last 10 hires completely qualified for that job? Or did you get that person's resume from your best friend, and your best friend vouched for him, and that's one of the reasons why he got that job? Anytime that those exclusions or exceptions are made for your friends or whatever, just know that there is many, 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 many people of color that are not being awarded those same opportunities. So if there is an opportunity during the hiring process for you to hire someone that is maybe gung-ho, maybe has all the hustle you're looking for, but zero experience or zero background in what you're doing, take the same chance on them that you would take on your best friend's random person that you've never met before. And I think that that is an actionable thing that if companies were to pursue the way that they pursue their racial nepotism. Sorry, I'm totally making up that word. That's not a real thing, but I think you understand what I'm saying. If other people can be hired just on work on who they know alone, just remember that there are not many Black directors, there are not many Black producers, there are not many Black camera operators, let alone best boys, grip, all these other things, because they don't know anyone, and that's how the people get jobs in this country. Somebody. That's it. So sorry, that's kind of my rant. I've tried very hard to think about something that people can actually take away from this conversation, and not necessarily just like esoteric ideas. So
especially in Buffalo too. It's the big living room. So certainly something we can do here. So Corey, I'm going to ask you this, Corey. You know what? I was just going to say to you, you look like Cory Booker, by the way. So I just called you Corey. Sorry. Might be the hair. But the last question, I'm going to ask Ikey the same one. What brands do you think are doing it right? Whether it's inside their companies or their messaging that they're doing with the work they do. I want you, and then we'll switch.
I've been talking for a while. You can take this.
You take this one first.
Brands that are doing it right. That is a great question. I'm trying to think of like brands that I like. You see a lot of brands in the media, and so I think probably a lot of people saw like the Dove ads over the last couple of years, and they've been trying to be more diverse and this and that, and from what I can remember, they've been doing pretty good. So I think they're doing all right. Whether or not they're hiring people of women and people of color and stuff like that, I'm not sure. It's hard to say. It's hard to say without actually knowing what's going on behind the brands, right? I know, like off the top of my head, I know like Apple ads are always very inclusive, but I don't think Apple's that inclusive. I don't know. That's just a hunch. It just doesn't feel like it would be. But their stuff looks inclusive, and that's important. There are some other brands that are, like Black owned, like a fashion brand that I look at a lot, Pierre Moss. A lot of their collections are based on things that are related to the Black experience. The owner is Black himself, and he talks a lot about how he wants to use his platform to raise awareness and things like that. So that's one thing you'll see from brands. I know Ben & Jerry's is very outspoken about how they think about things, which is awesome. And that's I guess better than talking about brands that I think are doing it well, because it's hard for me to come up with off the top of my head. But you'll see very clearly the brands that are taking a stance, and that could be a good way of knowing how serious they're taking it. Because some brands, and thankfully, like my day job, like we made a video about like saying with Black Lives Matter, like stopped all the advertising. And you'll see a lot of brands that will have like message on their website and things like that. And it's important to watch them over time, because a lot, like I think we mentioned earlier, there's a lot of pandering that might be happening. A lot of people like doing it for the clout, if you will. So it's important to watch how they react over time. Was it just a moment or a movement? I think I've heard someone say that before. Are they part of it? Are they doing active change? Are they actually changing their advertising? Or if you can figure out if they're actually making the hires, or at least trying to, that's a great way of doing it. One company, my best friend's mom works for a real estate company. I forget which one, but their CEO like put out this letter, and they immediately started groups at each branch of the real estate across the world. and which is awesome. They they appointed people to be in charge of their like diversity and inclusion. I actually did a talk for them a couple weeks ago, and that is an example of a company that potentially probably could just skated by like real estate and was like, oh, whatever, like Black Lives Matter, yada yada yada, made a statement and then moved on. But they like incorporated these practices into their business and made sure that each branch across their branches across the world had people that are willing to take the extra step to try to help inform people. Because I think for a lot of businesses, for like fashion and outward facing businesses, it's kind of easy to see because you'll see a lot of advertisements or videos or whatever or social media. But for the other businesses, I think it's important to take a, probably even more important to look at how they operate when they first start talking about this stuff and how they are going to continue talking about it. Because a lot of those other businesses have potentially even a bigger impact on people's lives. Like for example, historically, Black people or people of color have been pushed into certain areas. So as a real estate company, if they're actually taking this stuff seriously, they have the opportunity to really make a change for people's lives, right? And that's going to be huge going down the line. Is, you know, if people have been historically keeping people of color out of certain neighborhoods, and this real estate company is making an active push to make sure that they are acknowledging people's differences and doing their best not to have these biases, that's going to be much more impactful than like, I don't know, some like clothing brand adding more like diverse models, which is great, obviously, because our representation is important. But it's these other brands that have different aspects of society that are gonna, I think, are gonna be the ones that help move the needle. So those are the ones I would recommend keeping an eye out for, and making sure it's not just performative activism and they're actually hopefully doing, and for companies maybe that you guys are a part of now, like getting, and just this conversation itself, like keeping these things going, the fall off of people supporting this stuff is drastic as time goes on. So it's important for these companies that you follow or support to kind of hold them to it and be like, all right, are we still in this, or are you just doing it because it was cool at the time?
You know, that makes so much sense too, because instead of using the diversity in their marketing just to make more money for themselves, if they're doing it for the good to get people to change their lives and change, you know, get a career and do something different, I think that that makes a whole lot of sense, Ikey. Thank you for sharing that. Greg, do you want to weigh in on that question? And then I think we're getting close to the time.
Yeah, I think without hijacking, you know, the question itself, I think a lot of this boils down to that this is really awkward. This is really difficult for a lot of people, for a lot of companies. It's wildly difficult to discuss race, especially when you're a room full of white people trying to figure out, you know, like what, like how are you going to fix this, right? So it's easy to just ignore it. It's easier, it's more comfortable to go with what you know. And if we are realizing anything about what's going on in our current culture, is that we need to have difficult conversations. And that's the only way that we are going to learn why we need to change. And if that means hiring a person of color because you honestly want to change the way your company is headed, then you have to be intentional and hire that person and listen to them if they say no. If they say that something that you thought was good is not good, you have to be willing to get uncomfortable and find out why. Because I've been in the room plenty of times where I've said, I don't feel good about this. And really what they just wanted to hear was a yes out of me. They didn't want to hear like what my honest answer was. They wanted the black guy in the room to nod his head yes. And that's comfortable. That's easy to them. That's not hard. That's tokenism. That's, you know, to bring this full circle, that's what tokenism is.
You know what, that makes so much sense, because there's so many times when we've been trying to do that a lot more, is ask the questions. And we had a town hall one week where someone said, if you're not uncomfortable, you're not doing this right, because we have to have these uncomfortable conversations. And so we just keep asking questions. And I really appreciate Ikey and Greg being here with us today. I really do think you look like Cory Booker, which is a compliment, by the way. So I like that guy. But So, but I really think that, we really want to keep these conversations going. As we said in the, before we started, there's so much conversation on the news from, COVID and the election, that we don't want this to get buried and go away. The problem is still here. Racism, systemic racism, in so many different capacities. So we just want to make sure we keep the conversation going. And so we really appreciate your insights and the great work you're doing. And hopefully you'll get in LB one of these days, Greg. So we have you on our list.